Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, global stocks are in rally mode this morning. Risk appetite is back after the world's largest tech company spurred a stock market bounce on Wall Street. At one point yesterday, the Nasdaq was down 1.4%, but it closed more than 2% higher. Traders cemented bets on a quarter percentage point Fed rate cut next week after August core inflation came in hotter than expected. JP Morgan Asset Management Chief Global Strategist David Kelly says it shows there's no need for drastic action.
I think the Fed must be aware that if they go aggressive here, they're in danger of undermining consumer confidence. And honestly, the economy is doing exactly what they wanted to do. It is settling into a softer expansion, a slower expansion. That's what they want. So they only have to gradually return to normal on interest rates.
David Kelly at JP Morgan Asset. Now, one region not participating in the equity rally this morning is China. Stocks there fell to the lowest since January of 2019.
Well, Nathan, a day after underlying inflation unexpectedly picked up in August on higher prices for housing and travel, we get another key reading on inflation. At 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time, we get the latest reading on producer prices. We get a preview from Bloomberg's Michael McKee.
Prices at the factory gate aren't likely to surprise today, which means the Fed will remain on track for a rate cut next week. Producer prices have been falling faster than prices at the consumer level, and the consensus forecast is headline PPI will drop below 2%. The CPI increased at a 2.5% annual rate in August. That was enough to push market expectations for the Fed meeting to a quarter-point cut next week. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, Mike, thanks. And interest rates are in focus overseas as well. We get a policy decision from the European Central Bank this morning. Let's go to London and get the latest from Bloomberg's Ewan Potts. Ewan.
Nathan and Karen, while traders get more confident the Fed is moving closer to a 25 basis point cut, there's little doubt that's what we'll expect today from the European Central Bank. Every single economist in the Bloomberg survey, the ECB will trim its deposit rate by a quarter point to 3.5%, the second reduction of the cycle. But with services sector wages still rising rapidly, President Christine Lagarde is expected to remain tight-lipped on the pace and extent of any further easing. In London, I'm Ewan Potts, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ewan, thank you. Now let's turn to the latest in the presidential race. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are heading back on the campaign trail after a brief pause for September 11th observances. But the former president is casting doubt on whether he wants another debate with the vice president after his performance in Philadelphia Tuesday night.
When a fighter has a bad fight, gets knocked out, or loses the fight, the first thing he says is, "We want a rematch."
Former President Trump says he's leaving the door open to a debate on NBC or Fox, but he says it's not clear if he wants to. Trump is picking his campaign back up today in Tucson, Arizona.
And Vice President Harris is headed to North Carolina, Karen, for rallies in Charlotte and Greensboro. Her donors and supporters are praising her debate performance. Democratic operative Philippe Reines helped Harris prepare for Tuesday night. He says her aggressive performance was not in the playbook.
It's not an offense-defense thing. It's making sure that you're getting out the facts, which is something that the former president has a problem with.
Now, the Harris campaign could also get a lift from Taylor Swift's endorsement after the pop star told her 283 million Instagram followers that she is voting for the vice president. More than 300,000 people clicked on Taylor Swift's link to the government's voter registration website.
Well, Nathan, we are counting down to another historic moment for SpaceX. Later this hour, Elon Musk's space company is set to perform the first ever privately funded spacewalk. The event was delayed for a few hours with no explanation, but at 5:58 a.m. Wall Street time, tech billionaire Jared Isaacman and fellow Polaris Dawn crew member Sarah Gillis are scheduled to step outside their capsule and test SpaceX's newest spacesuits in the vacuum of space. This mission has already made history as SpaceX's furthest flight ever from Earth. It's orbiting 870 miles above the surface, the highest altitude since NASA's Apollo moon missions.
Well, while we keep an eye on that, Karen, we're also tracking this back on Earth. Two of Wall Street's largest investment banks may be cutting hours for some workers. We get the details from Bloomberg's Jeff Bellinger in New York.
Sources say J.P. Morgan Chase will limit junior banker hours to 80 per week in most cases. Exceptions may include extra work to complete live deals. And Bank of America is launching a new internal platform this month that will more closely monitor individual workloads. The moves come amid complaints across the industry that weekly hours are increasingly creeping past 100. Demands on Wall Street's rank and file have swelled in recent months. Executives are racing to capture an upswing in corporate deals, testing promises made by their firms just a few years ago to give junior staff more breaks. The recent death of a Bank of America associate from a heart attack has stirred a debate across the industry over whether workloads are too often unhealthy. In New York, Jeff Bellinger, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Jeff, thank you. Well, UniCredit CEO Andrea Orcel says a takeover remains a possibility regarding Commerce Bank. He spoke earlier this morning with Bloomberg's Francine Lacqua.
We are Commerce Bank largest private shareholders. We have 9%. And we're private shareholders that knows very well how much value can be created in running banks, not only because of what we've done at UniCredit, but also because of what we've done at HVB. And therefore, we have a lot of confidence in the value that Commerce Bank can still create.
UniCredit CEO Andrea Orcel revealed his bank now owns 9% of Commerce Bank, adding all the shares of the German government offered this week to a position it had quietly built in the market.
And Karen, another takeover may be in the works in the grocery aisle. Bloomberg News has learned that General Mills is in advanced talks to sell its North American yogurt business for more than $2 billion. Sources say the firm's in discussions to sell its U.S. and Canadian yogurt operations, which include the popular Yoplait brand, to two French dairy companies.
Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's John Tucker. John, good morning.
And good morning, Karen. Hurricane Francine slams southern Louisiana. It made landfall near Morgan City as a Category 2 storm, but it's been losing strength ever since and has been downgraded. Still, Francine strong enough to do damage to the Crescent City and surrounding areas. The big threat now is flooding and tornadoes. The timeline for Senate Republicans to find a replacement for Mitch McConnell is in flux. Bloomberg's Amy Morris reports from Washington.
Senate Republicans emerged from their closed-door meeting split on how quickly after the November election to choose a successor to McConnell. Now, those senators aligned with McConnell want a quick decision, or they say they risk losing time in the lead up to an aggressive agenda. But the caucus's more conservative faction wants more time to get potential concessions from the eventual leader and potentially organize around another candidate if they have to. The decision ultimately lies with Senate Republican Conference Chairman John Barrasso of Wyoming, who says those secret ballot contests are usually held before Thanksgiving. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
33,000 Boeing workers gave a taste of what could come if they vote to walk out at midnight.
Strike, strike, strike! Contract's not fair!
Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg says a work stoppage would harm efforts to turn around the plane maker's factories after years of turmoil. Nippon Steel mounting a last-ditch push to muster support for its $14 billion takeover of U.S. Steel. It's a deal opposed by President Biden, Vice President Harris, and ex-President Donald Trump. Biden and Harris want the company to remain domestically owned, while Trump has flatly said he'd block it. And the NFL averaged 21 million viewers per game during the league's opening week, making it the most watched Week 1 on record. All told, 123 million people saw at least part of one game. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, John, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The Yankees and Royals could meet in the postseason. They just had a 3-game series in the Bronx. Yanks won the opener. The Royals had a 3-hit shutout win Tuesday and a great game last night. Juan Soto, who was buried in a slump with a go-ahead 2-run homer 6th inning. The Royals tied the game in the 7th. Both teams scored in the 10th without getting a hit. The Yanks got the big hit. In the 11th, with a runner at third, Jazz Chisholm belted one to shortstop. The throw home was off the mark, and the Yanks won 4-3. It looked like the Mets were going to lose in Toronto, perhaps get no hit. The Blue Jays led 1-0, and Bowden Francis was 3 outs away from a no-hitter.
0-2. Hit high in the air, deep right field. Lindor swings and sends it out to tie the game and delivers however, heartbreak to the Blue Jays. Francisco Lindor in the ninth has tied the game up at 1, ripping the no-hitter up and putting the Mets on the board.
On WHSQ, Mets were hardly done. 5 more runs in the ninth, a 3-run homer by Francisco Alvarez. The Mets won 6-2. Both New York teams also got help elsewhere. There was drama at Fenway. The Red Sox beat the Orioles 5-3 on a walk-off 3-run homer 10th inning by Tyler O'Neill. That puts the Yankees game and a half ahead of Baltimore heading into tonight's Yankee game with the Red Sox. Atlanta lost 5-1 in Washington. The Mets are now a game ahead of the Braves. Week 2 NFL begins tonight in the AFC East. Buffalo at Miami. Sunday, Cleveland plays Jacksonville. Deshaun Watson will be the Browns quarterback, though the NFL is investigating the latest Watson sexual assault accusation. A woman filed a civil suit stemming from an alleged incident 4 years ago. Watson yesterday strongly denied the accusation. He already served a lengthy suspension after 24 previous alleged incidents. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports. Karen and Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager, and we are counting down to what could be another historic moment for SpaceX. Later this hour, 2 private astronauts, including a tech billionaire, are scheduled to step outside their Crew Dragon capsule and perform what would be the first ever civilian spacewalk on the SpaceX Polaris Dawn mission. And ahead of it, we are joined this morning by Bloomberg Intelligence senior analyst John Davies. John, good morning. Walk us through the timeline for what we're expecting later this hour.
Good morning. Thank you. This is quite an astonishing development. It's going to be the first private spacewalk. They're going to have to be doing it in a slightly different way than the sort of traditional one, which you've had off the ISS, where there's an actual airlock. In this case, they're going to have to vent the entire aircraft, so every one of the astronauts is going to have to be in their vacuum suits. And it's going to be happening just around the end of this hour. So, it's a very exciting moment.
That points to a little bit of the risk that goes into something like this, to have every member of the crew in their suits for this spacewalk. How much preparation goes into something like this?
Just vast amounts. So SpaceX itself has a policy of doing sort of small incremental advancements, and they sort of try things. If they don't work, they roll back and try a different approach. And you've seen this with their development of their Falcon 9 launch vehicle. It had many fiery deaths early on, and in terms of the rocket, and they gradually improved it. This one is obviously something where everything has been tested to the nth degree. All the astronauts have been trained very carefully, and it should be in terms of space travel, a reasonably low risk environment.
But in some ways, bucking the idea of incremental approach for SpaceX, this is happening at altitudes that have never been attempted since the Apollo missions that landed people on the moon in the 1970s. Why did SpaceX decide to perform this spacewalk so high above planet Earth, John?
It's partly because of the driver of the private investment they've had. It's the request of the billionaire investor on board, and it's also to do with the exact orbit they're following and what they want to cover on the ground. So there's no particularly strong reason for them to be going low down.
Now that we understand the spacewalk was supposed to happen a couple of hours ago, do we have any idea why the mission, or at least this aspect of the mission, was delayed up until this hour?
I don't believe I've heard anything specific. Quite often with these things, they just want to check things to the nth degree. There's no massive reason to avoid delaying, so I'd imagine it's just an abundance of caution.
Now, the part of this mission is the test of these brand new spacesuits that, as you mentioned, are vacuum pressured, obviously, for the vacuum of space. What's different about these spacesuits that it's different from the ones that we're so used to, the bulky setup for NASA astronauts on the International Space Station?
Sure. Well, I mean, they're made this decade for starters.
Sure.
So the ones they're using on the ISS are incredibly old now, and indeed they've been hoping to come up with some replacements. There's all manner of NASA contracts around trying to come up with new vacuum suits, some of which have been quite unsuccessful. So it's another example of SpaceX being, really vertically integrated. They do absolutely everything themselves, soup to nuts. They're making the rocket, they're making the capsule, they're making the suits. They've got the satellites, which are going to be relaying the signals from the vehicle and from the astronauts. So it's going to be very interesting from a NASA perspective as well, looking at this.
And just in our last 30 seconds, once the spacewalk happens, what are we expecting Jared Isaacman and Sarah Gillis to do outside the capsule? Just take a peek out, or how is this going to work?
Essentially, that's it. Although it's a kind of a huge deal, they're not trying to do anything, hugely exciting. But I mean, it's exciting enough. I'd imagine once they get back inside, their heart rate will take some time to come back down.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.